Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for standing by, and welcome to the EVV Stakeholder Meeting. At this time, all participants are in listen-only mode, and later we will conduct a question-and-answer session. Instructions will be given at that time. As a reminder, this conference is being recorded. I'd now like to turn the call over to Kim Rutledge. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning. This is Kim Rutledge at the Department of Social Services. We're going to go ahead and get the meeting started and going off the agenda that was emailed out. We've got, just so you know, we have over 100 people on the phone and about 50 in the room, so this is going to be, when we get to the Q&A, it's going to have to be a very patient process. So right now I'm going to be turning it over to Debbie Thompson, the Deputy Director of Adult Programs at CDSS.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome. Thank you to everyone for coming and engaging with us around our initial process in talking about the new federal requirement for the electronic visit verification. We're going to spend some time today talking about what that new requirement is and kind of the programs that we've identified in California that are impacted by it, and then talking a little bit with you about the document that you received, the request for information that we are wanting to release fairly soon after this meeting, but we really want stakeholders to be a part of this process. We're very much in the information gathering process about this. That's why a request for information is our next step to this, because it will be the next step in continuing to gather information about EVV, what the requirements really mean, what they mean for the state of California, and how we would and are going to look at and approach doing EVV here. We definitely need the feedback from the folks in this room, on the phone, in helping us figure this out. That's what the intent of this meeting is. Obviously, this became federal law last December, and I kind of want to start by saying, because I know a lot of concerns that we're hearing from folks already have to do with kind of what the federal approach to this was around being a very program integrity, fraud, prevention kind of approach. And for us, we're really not looking at it so much in that way. We're really trying to look at it for the state of California and how it can serve us and our recipients and providers, and we want your help in doing that. We're looking at it more from the recipient side, how we can potentially know better if people aren't receiving services or haven't received services for a period of time, and ensure that someone's checking in and making sure that they're okay. From the provider side, looking at it as kind of along the lines of what we've just implemented with electronic timesheets and having that kind of a support for our providers where they're getting prompts and status of things going on, and being able to get more expedited pay because things are being submitted more quickly into the system for payment. So those are the things that we're thinking about and how we're approaching that, and how we want to move forward with electronic visit verification. And we want all of your thoughts and concepts and ideas and concerns so that as we gather more information and look at how we will approach this, that we have that information to look at it for. After we go through this meeting today, and people will have an absolute opportunity towards the end to give some initial comments and feedback on what we're providing, the information we're providing, and that you know about EVV, there is going to be then a period of time to make additional comments, send them in to us, email, so that we have your comments as we prepare the final release for the request for information and move to the next step of information gathering about how we're going to do this in California, and after we do that process, there will be yet another stakeholder meeting to continue getting feedback about what we learned from that process. So there will be ongoing engagement with stakeholders, so please don't feel like this is your one and only time to give feedback on this process and what this is going to look like for the state of California. We really value and want this to make sense for our programs here. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to JC, who's going to just walk us through the requirements themselves and what we've learned thus far from CMS.
Good morning, everyone. My name is JC Cooper. I'm Assistant Deputy Director at Department of Health Care Services. So all of you, or many of you, received a copy of the CMS, the large August 2017 CMS presentation. If you don't have a copy, we have copies for you here. It's a long presentation, so I'm going to give kind of the high-level overview of some of the touch points within it to kind of frame some information for the discussion today, and then we'll go into the rest of the agenda. So the Cures Act does a number of things. However, one of the things within the Act is the requirement to implement the electronic verification system, or what we call the EVV system. The system does require that we electronically verify personal care services in-home or home health services that are done in the home. This includes all personal care services or home health services that are provided under the state plan. It also includes those services that are provided through waiver programs, and we'll talk about that later. There's a number of home and community-based waivers in the state of California that this would also impact from a federal requirement point of view, and we'll be talking through that. So the Act defines kind of very high-level requirements for the system. It requires stakeholder engagement processes, which we are engaging all of you today and will throughout this entire process. And training requirements. All of the language within the Cures Act is pretty high level, and we still are waiting for additional guidance from CMS. We have the presentation that they gave in August. However, they're also supposed to be releasing guidance in January of 2018, which we are hoping will help provide even additional information for us on how we can explore this in California moving forward as we're gathering our information to decide where we go with this. One thing that the Act does clearly define for EVV is that the system must electronically verify a few pieces, and I'm going to walk through those. So the system must verify the type of service that is being provided, the individual receiving that service, the date of service, the location of the service, the individual providing the service, and the time the service begins and ends. So here in California, we currently collect all of this information with the exception of two things, the type of service that's being provided as well as the time the service begins and ends. So just wanted to highlight that particular piece. One thing that the Act also does is gives a lot of discretion to the states for their implementation. And that is why California is currently going through an information gathering process about how we would potentially roll out something like EVV in the state of California. We obviously are a very large state. We have a very large presence when it comes to personal care services and home health services in this state, and so we are trying to be very thoughtful about our research, our approach, and engaging with people through this process to make it work for California. They do allow for the state to select their own design or model. One thing you will note in the CMS presentation, they go over a high level, different types of models that are being explored across the nation. I'm not going to walk through those, but they are there for reference if you want to look at them and have note of that. It also allows us to implement various quality control measures to the state's liking, and that is something that would be explored through this entire process. It also does allow for us to have some enhanced federal funding for the design, development, installation, and operation of the EVV program that is selected. So just noting that for individuals as well. So when does this have to, or when does the federal requirement be implemented? Personal care services must start using EVV by January 1 of 2019. And home health services must start using EVV by January 1 of 2023. That being said, 2019 is around the corner, and so we are still exploring in the state of California how we will work towards this. Penalties, there are penalties that are outlined in the Act. So there are penalties for noncompliance. FMAP shall be reduced in 2019 or 2020 by 0.25% points with incremental reductions annually to a max reduction of 1% by 2023. There are similar penalties for home health services. Today, we just want to note we're only going to be discussing personal care services and how we would approach potentially personal care services with EVV and not necessarily home health. However, we will be learning from this process to inform how we implement or look at implementing EVV for home health services in California as well. I would also note that such penalties may be waived for a state if we demonstrate good faith effort, that we are making efforts towards moving to an EVV system and or have encountered unavoidable system delays that are in place, and obviously the state would be looking at that. So as I mentioned earlier, the Act is pretty high level in regards to its guidance and framework, and we do look forward to CMS providing additional guidance in January of 2018 that will better inform the decisions that the state has to make. So that's the high-level overview of what we know today.
Okay, the next thing on our agenda is to talk about what programs we've identified that would be impacted by this new requirement. And for the Department of Social Services, clearly the in-home supportive services program would be impacted, which is a large program and the largest one to be impacted by this requirement for the state. It would also impact the waiver personal care services providers that actually go through the payroll system through CMIPS that IHSS uses. I'm going to let the other departments share which other programs would be impacted for them.
So in addition to IHSS, California provides and has a large number of home and community-based waivers. So we will talk through the other impacted waivers that provide personal care services as we've identified through the waivers. So the home and community-based waiver, also known as the NIF-AH waiver, provides both personal care services, as Debbie just mentioned, as well as some home respite services that would be subject to the EVV requirements. The IHO waiver, or the in-home operations waiver, also provides WPCS services and home respite services that would be required to provide EVV. The ALW, or assisted living waiver, has some personal care services through the homemaker services waiver service. The pediatric palliative care waiver, the HIV and AIDS waiver is also provides attendant care services that meet the requirement of personal care services. The MSSP waiver, and then we've talked also about IHSS, and then the DD waiver, and I will turn it over to Jim. And pass this down for the DD waiver.
Hi, this is Jim Knight with Department of Developmental Services, and as mentioned, we do have funding through a number of our services which are funded through the Regional Center under Home and Community-Based Services waiver, as well as state plan amendment. Some of the services that will have components of personal care would be supported living and in-home respite that would be subject to these requirements.
The only additional piece that I would mention is that we are evaluating the impact to some of the managed care plans like SCAN or PACE in regards to any personal care services provided through that in the home, because that is one of the requirements for EVV, but we are still looking at that and we'll clarify that in future guidance by the state.
Thank you. The next thing that we were going to do, Sarah Dion from the Office of Systems Integration was going to walk through for you the request for information proposal that you received as a part of the invite and kind of give you a high-level overview of what we're asking for in that request. And this is the document that we're really looking for comments from folks on about, are there other things that we want information about or need to be thinking about as a part of EVV in the state of California, and that we should be including in that request for additional information. So, Sarah, if you'd walk that.
Yeah, thank you, Debbie. So again, my name is my name is Sarah Dion. I'm from the Office of Systems Integration. So our role in this process is to procure a solution that will support EVV on the behalf of all these different agencies within Health and Human Services agency. So with any large procurement like this, the very first step that we have is to do some research. You can kind of call it market research. So the mechanism that we have to do that is this document we call a request for information. So we send this document out to the vendor community to ask them what kind of things they have out there now and give us some information about that. So I'll walk through this document now. So as the first page indicates, the purpose is to get information from the vendor community on things that are already available or could be available to support California in acquiring an EVV solution. Then if you turn to page 5, there's a description of our current solution. So a request for information is kind of a two-way communication. We're not only trying to get information from the vendors, but we're trying to let the vendors know what's in California and what kind of our challenges are and what we're looking for. So on page 5 starts a description, a high-level description of how we use in-home services today in California. It describes a little about the CMIP system, our new electronic timesheet solution, the things that we use today. So it's kind of some background for the vendor's sake. Then if you go to page 9, so pages 9 through 11 talk about proposed environment. And at the bottom of that page is where we talk about the actual requirements for the EVV solution, which JC very eloquently just described a few minutes ago. So at the bottom page you'll see those same things that JC just described. And if you go on to pages 11 through 13, this is where the crux of what we want you guys to look at. These are the actual vendor questions that we're going to ask and the instructions to them. So if you go to page 14, that's where the actual questions start. So in those questions, again, we're looking for what kind of systems are already out there, what kind of solutions are already out there, are there services available, are there turnkey things, is it something we're going to have to custom build? So we're trying to understand what's already out there. So the first two things. Then we're trying to understand how these vendors implement these solutions. So what is their experiencing in rolling out these kind of solutions to other states and other entities? So we want to get those lessons learned and do a better job, or do the best job that we can in rolling out this system. So again, so if you just want to read through those questions, and that's where a lot of the feedback should come back to us, is did we ask the right questions? We also want to know about how these vendors have face challenges that we see in California. So one of our biggest challenges is we're just very large. I mean, everything California is large. So how would they handle a very large population that has to use this system? How would they handle somebody? And then we ask about individual challenges too, like what happens if somebody forgets to check out at the end of the day? How does their solution handle that? So how do we get good information to the recipient and to the providers? What is the communications? So those kind of things. How are they going to give us the best solution to meet some of the challenges that we know are unique to California? So that's about it. So if you read again, emphasis on looking at those questions starting on page 14 we'd really appreciate that feedback. If there's any questions about that, we'll have the questions at the end, yeah.
So thanks, Sarah, for that. And as Sarah was just talking about, we really want to make sure that we're asking the right questions and getting the right information. We know California has some very unique things that we need to be considering when we are looking at this, such as many of the IHSS providers live in the home with those that they provide services to. How will that work? They not only live in the home, but they provide services throughout the day, starting and stopping. So I might do some in the morning and some in the afternoon, some in the evening, some in the middle of the night. How will that be addressed? So we want to make sure, and what we really are looking for feedback from all of you about is what are those things that we need to be considering when we are asking these questions and getting information and making sure that what we're being required to do we can do in California in the way that's going to make sense for for us and that is going to be beneficial, hopefully, as possible to our people we serve as well as the individuals who provide those services. So we really look forward to hearing back comments and thoughts, concerns, ensuring that we are looking at and addressing all of the different areas that we need to as we explore how we do this and where we go from here. So now we're going to spend most of the rest of the time giving everybody in the room and on the phone an opportunity to start giving us those comments and that feedback, and we'll be taking notes of all of that. Again, as I said earlier, there will also be the opportunity to continue to do that back to us in writing, and we will provide at the end of the meeting information about how to do that. But I just want to open it up, and maybe I'll start in the room and take a few comments from in the room, and then we will go to the phones and have the operator assist us in taking comments from folks on the phone and kind of alternate back and forth. So, yeah. Hi, Kevin.
Hi. I'm Kevin Asden, Coalition. A couple of things. Coalition California Waffle Rights Organization. One is whatever you guys are going to build, IHHS has been living in the 20th century, and we're wondering if we can bring it into the 21st century by making it more responsive to the consumers. Are they going to be able to apply online? Are they going to be able to do stuff online rather than going into the welfare office to see somebody? That's one big concern we have. The other big concern is that often these things are built and there's stakeholder involvement in it. If those stakeholders are limited to the state and the county, and the other parties, like the advocates and the unions, are not involved in it. And we want to make sure that everybody is involved in it from A to Z, not when it's built, and at the end they say, okay, well, what do you think about this? And then when we raise a concern, they say, that's going to cost $5 million to fix that. And the reason why we had that concern, we were never at the table. And the only time we've been involved in the process is for the state hearing system that they're working right now. They're involving stakeholders. Otherwise, every system that I've seen has been a disaster.
Well, hopefully we're learning from state hearings, and here we are at the beginning stages with everybody in the room. So thank you.
I'm keeping hope alive.
Okay. Yes.
Hi. I haven't had a chance to look through all of this. One of the things that there are a lot of systems you're talking about.
Can you introduce yourself, please? I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Nancy Choices Person-Centered Services. We provide supported living services, and supported living services also frequently include in-home supported services. So one of the things that I think maybe might be helpful when looking at this is that in-home supported services is task-based. And which is part of what you were talking about being an issue, because people are there for a period of time, but they might not be doing that little task or doing this little task. And so when I'm looking at type of service performed, I'm not really clear on what that means. And if you're providing supported living services, you're providing support for that entire time that you're there. So I think that will have to be clarified and maybe consider something that's not task-based. I mean, you need to complete these tasks, but maybe there's more to it than just a task. That might be helpful. So.
Thank you very much. Anyone else in the room?
Well, I just had a question. Chris Jensen from TELUS, we're an EVV vendor. But I've tried to learn as much as I can about some of the unique aspects of California versus other states, and maybe that's a long answer, but I know, piggybacking off of your statement, I just want to understand that a little better if we can.
Okay. So why don't we go to the phone for a few minutes?
And ladies and gentlemen, if you'd like to ask a question, you may press star and then 1. Our first question will come from Tammy Orr.
Hello?
Hi.
Hi. Yes, I'm Tammy Orr. I've been doing home care on my brother, who's basically an infant, for 57 years. And at this point, I'm also taking care of my mom, not through IHSS. My grandmother helped write the Lanterman Act when I was 9 years old, and I've been living under that act for most of my life, which means that we consider this community care. We visit relatives, we go to town, we go to the movies. It's become more of a in-home care than community care. I'm very concerned about this because under the overtime laws, I'm donating 12 hours a day, and he has got uncontrolled seizures, functions at about a 3-year-old level, incontinent, angry. We're both elderly now, and I cannot imagine that I would be required to spend 12 hours a day in my home. I think that everything that we've talked about is in violation of the Lanterman Act, and I think that that's going to be a huge hurdle that we have to walk through because the Lanterman Act guarantees people with developmental disabilities that they are able to access their community, go to movies, go to church, go to family events, funerals, weddings. We live as if we are normal people in the community, and I can't imagine being afraid that I have to call in and I'm 5 minutes late. I mean, what if I'm bathing him after an incontinence incident and I'm 5 minutes beyond the time that I'm supposed to call in? The other question that I have is, how does this work for those of us who live together and have always lived together, the 12 hours a day that we donate, that we are not paid for? I mean, does this mean that we have to be in our house for 12 hours a day and then we're free to go somewhere? We go places in the motorhome. We live in a beautiful place where we can go park by the lake. I mean, am I in violation if I make him lunch and drive down to the shore at the lake and eat there? I mean, this is going to really, really affect those of us who live with our clients, and I realize that we're able to put together our own view of how this should go, but I think there's a big difference between somebody who needs 2 hours a day or 3 hours 2 times a week or something in order to stay in their home, and somebody who is completely not self-directed and would die within 24 hours if somebody weren't taking care of them. So how does this affect those of us that are donating 12 hours of our time per day? And what kind of rules could we come up with for those of us that live with our clients and donate a significant amount of our time unpaid and just continue to have to live within our home? How does that work with the federal laws that they just put out around the time that we got overtime that were saying how people have the freedom to under federal law to move about freely and live their lives as if they were not disabled? How does that work for us?
Thank you very much, and I think everybody in this room would agree with your view that we want people integrated into the community and that is a strong value, and that's certainly a part of what the uniqueness of California and people living together and how we're going to make it make sense, and I appreciate your comments. Thank you.
And the next question will come from Dallas Maxfield.
Hi, this is, I'm with Dallas Maxfield, Kevin Rath from Manos Home Care and the California Respite Association. We have a question about California's approach. Are you planning on having a master platform for EVV that will allow a variety of electronic EVV vendors to upload data into that, or is California considering a single master platform that all vendors will have to directly access, all providers will have to directly access? We hope that California will be considering a platform that will handle multiple EVV providers.
And so we're very early in gathering information. We really don't have any decision at this point in time of that level of technical approach to what we will be looking at. So I can't give you an answer to that question. And this is all an exploration stage at this point.
Okay, thank you. We'll be continuing to work with you guys on that then. Okay.
And our next question will come from Dennis Fleming.
Hi, this is Denise Fleming from the In-Home Support Services Advisory Committee. My question was to make sure that you did consider that we do have some consumers out there that are blind and disabled, so we want to make sure that we have resources out there for them, as well as I think it has been addressed already that we do have providers out there that are reaching multiple consumers. They're providing services a few hours at one consumer, and then they're going on to other consumers and providing a few hours there.
Thank you very much. And please do look at our RFI document questions that Sarah was talking about. We tried to capture most of what you're talking about, but if we missed something, that's what we're looking for is feedback on things that we may not have captured enough or well enough in that document. Thank you very much.
Our next question will come Margaret Hall.
Hi. I am with a grassroots disability rights organization by the name of Quito. I have 3 quick questions. One, will there be consideration of how to accommodate people with electrical sensitivities who can't be around wireless? 2, are there regulations that have been enacted yet on the implementation of this? This isn't the same as the best practices. It's the implementation regulations. And 3, already it's very hard for folks to find providers given the labor market, maybe related to demographics of people aging, competition with middle-class elderly people who can pay out of pocket. Whatever the reason, it's really hard to find providers. And so anything that adds a burden to the provider employment situation will be destabilizing. So will there be added cost to the providers to have to come up with money to buy devices? And will there be an analysis by the state of the cost burden to the state, not only in terms of the administrative costs that you incur? I know there's federal reimbursement, but the administrative costs that you incur and the cost to the providers in terms of the bureaucratic obligations of checking in, checking out, and to the consumers. So I want to know if you're going to be weighing the pros and cons of this as it goes along.
Thank you so much for your comments. No, there aren't any regulations either federally or at the state level at this point in time. We are definitely still in trying to figure out how this is all going to work, and your comments are helpful in things to be considering. Certainly locating providers we know is a challenge, and we wouldn't want to do anything to impede that further. Hopefully in the approach we're wanting to take with this, it would be providing some supports as far as the payment process for providers that could actually help with some of that. And as far as cost for providers, that's certainly not any intent that we have. There shouldn't be a cost to the provider. Thank you very much for your feedback and for giving us additional things to consider as we walk through all of this.
Our next question will come from Kurt Child.
Well, good morning, and thank you all very much for reaching out to us all so early in the process. We really appreciate the opportunity to comment, and particularly even as early as the RFI, so thank you for for doing that. We also certainly require or understand that you're dealing with a system now where you've got federal requirements, and so federal law is going to dictate a lot on how you move forward and what can ultimately pass the approval process there. And we certainly understand that you've got fiscal penalties that are going to keep this moving along. So I have a couple of comments. One is on the RFI, and the other is more of a process question that I would suggest that might be helpful. And I'll speak from my prior experience as a State Department director that was responsible for procuring a very large technology system in California that was required by federal law and had significant federal penalties. And so related to that, the first on the RFI is the challenge that you all have and we all have is that you've got to work on designing the system at the same time you're going to be making a lot of program and policy decisions, and as you all know better than I, the challenges that lie in whether program drives technology or technology drives the program. So we understand what you're doing here is laying out the requirements or the questions you want answered for the technology, and that this is not really defining the policy at this point, but we think that's not far behind. I would suggest that perhaps a question that you can put out to your vendors in soliciting this information is what kind of architecture are they going to be able to provide as an open architecture that will allow room for the policy decisions to be made along with the development. So, as you all know, an open architecture is going to leave room for policy decisions to get made along the process of development. And I think it's worth sort of forcing them to think about it, because where you've got federal penalties in the back end, it's tough to take the time up front and define all the policy and make sure the technology drives that. And so you're going to need an architecture that will allow that to happen. The other piece that I would suggest on process now as we move forward is that and we use this in the development that I think was very helpful, and in this case where the end user is not counties and states entirely, but it's a more intimate end user use here, that you actually put together what would be a stakeholder work group that would actually spend the time on helping out sort out the policy along the way, not to replace this effort here with a large group, but I think you will need, and it will be helpful to have a smaller ongoing group willing to commit the time to help provide the policy guidance, because again, I'll know better than I how quickly those happen, and when your vendor sends you a note, how do you want to handle this? We would like to be in a position that you would have a go-to place for the stakeholder input for that. So it'd be an up and ongoing group that gets very familiar and gets down in the weeds to help you sort those pieces out. So sorry for taking so much time, but thank you once again for reaching out, and we hope to be helpful in what is a system with a lot of exciting challenges and opportunities. Thanks.
Thanks, Curtis. And yes, balancing technology and policy is always can be a challenge, But that's a part of this discussion. While we are looking for a vendor to talk to us about what they can do, we do want our policy to drive what our technology is going to be. So that's why we want stakeholder input to what do we need our technology that we're looking for to be able to do for us that's going to make sense for our programs and our way we want to approach it in California. Thanks, Curtis. And I'm going to open it up in the room for comments. Brandy.
So I'm Brandy Wolf. I'm the statewide policy director for SEIU Local 2015. We represent the IHSS providers in 37 of the counties. I have more of a comment, sort of what we will be looking for, and we'll be submitting this in writing. But since there are some of the potential vendors in the room, I want to just be transparent about what the unions are thinking. I know we have a number of members who have called in on the phone and have emailed and called me as the policy director expressing incredible concerns about this policy and what that means as it interplays with the IHSS or the FLSA violations and all of that. So, I want to do my part to express those concerns in this room. I think we've had conversations about this before. But in terms of the actual sort of EVV mechanism, some of the things that are important to us on the union side is ensuring like a multi-use functionality. So for folks who cannot be around a wireless technology, is there the phone-in option, but also for people who sort of an app-based technology would function better. So we're looking at sort of that multi-functionality. We have seen with the work that we've done on FLSA implementation and now with electronic timesheets that the unions are being asked to do a lot of the provider interface on the policy changes. So it will be imperative to us. It's important to me that the vendors know this, that the unions will be working to ensure that there is some sort of union communication through whatever technology is used for EVV so that we can access communication with the providers directly. And then the last thing that's sort of on my little list of notes at this point is just ensuring that there is sort of fluidity in the process between electronic business verification and the electronic timesheet system. So we are incredibly excited about the rollout of electronic timesheets. Our members are really excited, but figuring out how EVV technology is going to work with the electronic timesheets in a way that still meets the requirements of the FLSA stuff is going to be really important. So those are sort of the things that are coming up initially, and again, we'll comment on those in writing, but wanted to put it out there for the vendor community as well.
Thanks. Christina.
Hi, Christina Bach-Hamilton with UW National. Debbie, has the department considered, or I guess, how do you tell me, a legal analysis if this is a violation of the APA? Because that can't help but keep coming to that contradiction, that there's something inherently constrictive and not least restrictive that is possible here.
So are you thinking of in the aspect of what the person was bringing up earlier with do we have to stay in the home versus being able to be out in the community?
EVV in a way that is not in practicality restrictive, like in spirit, right? So, and I'm not saying that you know this. I'm wondering, is there not a value possibly in the department or in the state actually kind of looking at it through that lens that maybe it's not worth resources if it's not actually legal?
I think it's a good question, Christina, and will you send it in? And certainly that's something that we can have conversation about. I think that at this point it's all kind of open for discussion as far as how this makes sense, how it will be implemented, all of it. Other folks in the room?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Nicole Vasquez with the Assembly Budget Committee,
And can I just ask about finance and how the new system would be paid for? Okay. So the design, development, and implementation phase of the project actually can get a 90% federal FMAP. And then the maintenance of the operation gets a 75%. That's probably the extent of my information on that right now. Does anybody else have something to add?
Yeah.
And the ongoing,
yeah, 75%.
Yeah, that's correct.
Debbie, I don't think they heard the question back.
So the question was financing for the EVV system, and I think JC had also touched on it earlier, which is for the design, development, and implementation phase, it's a 90% FMAP that the state can get, and then for the maintenance and operation phase, the ongoing phase, it's a 75%. And
I understand what FMAP.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, so FMAP is the federal funding. So it's a federal match. So the federal government would pay 90%, the state would pay 10%, or 75 and 25.
And that's kind of what we know at that point about that.
It does, and I raised the question because so thinking about it vis-a-vis the penalty, and of course we're early in the process, so we don't know the extent to which what the overall budget for the changes would be in isolation from your regular operation of CMS too. So looking at what the cost might be in comparison to what a penalty might be, I think is a question. Given what Christina's raising about us actually abiding by current law on ADA and homestead and Lanterman. So those are all questions, but I think I'll submit some things on my behalf as well. So again, some things to think about.
Thank you.
We've got one more back in the corner here.
Okay.
Hi, Nancy Chance again, and my question is similar to the question about the electronic timesheet. I think my question is there a way to encompass everything so it includes clocking in, clocking out, all the information that you want? Because I'll be quite frank, at this point, we have trouble getting people to remember to clock in and clock out, and that is about being paid. So I'm really concerned that if you add another system on top of just trying to get that done, it would be better if it could be one system that does all of the things you're asking for, I think.
And I think that's probably kind of our intent, too, is how to kind of integrate everything together.
Yeah, and if you read the RFI, we specifically told the vendor community about our electronic timesheet solution and specifically asked, could it be leveraged? So,
good. Should we go back to the phones for more questions?
Sure. Our next question will come from Stephanie Garswit. Please go ahead.
Jan, right? Yes. Thank you. A lot of time, please.
Stephanie, line's open.
Go ahead and my name is Stephanie, and I'm from the IHSS Advisory Committee in Riverside. I'm an IHSS consumer, and I'm also linked in with the disability community through SECA, and I was part of the statewide IHSS Advisory Committee. So the first comment I want to make is to thank you for having this so early in the process. And I know that I had heard a lot of concern from the community from people that could not be here today. And we have asked that when you record this call, if you would put it up on the internet so that other people could hear what's going on. I think that's so important, and I would really appreciate that. I think also an earlier comment that was made, I really resonate to, in that if you also had smaller groups, work groups, where you had people that represented both providers and the disability community, that you could do intense information gathering with, as well as these statewide calls, I think that would be really, really good. And my final comment comes from being a consumer and how this affects me personally. I'm self-directing. I require maximum care. I use 3 care providers currently and 1 backup neighbor. And I'll tell you, the process of scheduling, looking after time cards, and I literally use a spreadsheet to do it. And as we are adding on the various complexities, I think that it's really important to look for simplification. and to make all the information accessible to the consumer, because we are the employers of record, and we are signing off on all of these things. And I know with the electronic timesheet, the information was richer and denser to the provider than to the consumer. It was not balanced. We didn't get as much information as consumers. So I really need to emphasize that the consumer needs to get this information. And finally, thank you so much for this opportunity, and I hope that you will both podcast the link of this call and a place where people can write in by email to give their suggestions, because this really is going to come out of our budget. If I hear your budget people correctly, we're going to end up paying for 35% of this overall. And I don't see how that doesn't come out of the program and land on the consumers in one way or another. So your ability to make this as streamlined as possible is going to be at the crux of it. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
And our next question will come from Mark Beckwith. Please go ahead.
Yes. Well, at the beginning of the call, it said something about a penalty of like 1%. Can you explain what that was about? That's if the state doesn't provide EVV, they'll be penalized 1%. Is that correct?
Yes. So for non-implementation or compliance with the electronic visit verification, there is a federal penalty. It's an escalating penalty. It starts at 0.25% and goes up 0.25% each year till it hits 1%. And so, yes, that's a penalty for not doing EVV, a federal penalty.
Well, maybe that would be the most cost-effective. This is just to say, to heck with it, because I don't believe this is about quality. It's about quality control and not about making services better and help being concerned for the consumer. There's another effort to, they think there's fraud or something. And I think that should be considered of just not doing this at all. I know there are a lot of vendors out there, they'd be rubbing their hands and they're like, oh boy, we can get a fat cut. Whole thing.
Okay.
I think it would be worthwhile.
I'm sorry.
Having a big brother looking over having their shoulder is not going to help me out at all, or my attendants. And some attendants don't have cell phones. Maybe they don't want to give their number out.
Mark, were you done? I'm sorry.
After, why don't we just forget this whole thing? It's a big waste of time. There's no benefits to consumers. Put Big Brother on our backs. Just tell them that go ahead and start penalizing us and just don't do it. I think that's the best solution.
Thanks for your comment, Mark.
And our next question will come from Jeff Tagrilla.
God, I didn't realize, Hello. If you can hear me, my two or three things I'll bring up is thank you for repeating the questions going on in there. Single thing is this platforms and soil communications would invite you to make sure with the PUC checking as far as making sure that there is a means. I hear cloud, things. These are all technical issues, but more, I think, for this is that concern of how, for people that do not have electronic means, of what alternative tools. I'm suggesting that you may consider some form of tablet or means by which they can provide input to get this, since you want to insist on electronic means.
An 800 number.
You know, did you get that?
Yeah, and thank you. And you'll know in the RFI requirements, we did ask the vendors that they would need to provide multiple options for reporting, telephone as well as online or those kinds of things. So that's definitely something we are thinking about, and hopefully
I will offer as being here in right here in Sacramento, there's a lot of dead zones, and we're a very, very slow wave band, so you've got multiple platforms and everything else. It's more technical down the line, but please be sure that, go down there to the slowest and rural being able to communicate to you.
Right. Thank you for your comment.
And our next question will come from Marissa Shaw.
Hi. Several questions. I would just say in general first that I am a member of Cueto and like Margaret Hall, and we have several questions that we would like answered. I have them typed out, and I would like to find a person that I can send them to for some direct responses via email.
Okay. At the end of the call, we'll be providing the information about where to send comments and questions in. So we'll certainly do that.
Okay, thanks. That wasn't my only comment. Second comment and question is, I'm a dual consumer, I guess you could say. I'm self-directed under IHSS, and I'm self-directed under SOS as the region center. So how would that be handled if a consumer has more than one service? So that's my second question. And the reason why I ask that is because EVV really scares me, considering that I feel like, and I'm sure I'm not the only consumer that feels this way, that we won't be able to leave our house. And I see the CURES Act that you're trying to implement flies in the face of the Lanterman Act, and it also flies in the face of Olmstead. So I'm really concerned about if we're able to leave our house with our attendants, or what if our attendant is running an errand and we're somewhere else at the present moment? Are we going to be accused of fraud in that particular instance? Are we going to have less freedoms than we do now under the current system? And I also agree with the comments like, what if an attendant is giving direct care and is not able to call in at the moment that something has occurred? But I really want to preface make the point that I kind of agree with Mark Beckwith that for consumers that are self-directing, this is kind of another layer of difficulty and an infringement on our personal lives. So I want to make that point and see that doesn't occur. But if we have to deal with this system, then I would also like to reiterate that, people with disabilities have lives, and so do the attendants. And a lot of the times there are services that are outside of the home. And, for example, what if we want to go to a community-based service, or the consumer wants to participate in their own type of program? And, I wouldn't want to see a limitation on the current services that the state is providing now.
I appreciate your comments, and I think that you've articulated, as the earlier person did, about being able to be in the community and not to be just stuck at home. And I think that that's a value that is shared by everyone, and that's why we're looking at how we approach this in California. And it is certainly not our intent to have people have to be locked in their home all day and not be able to be integrated into the community, receiving other services in the community. And so that is certainly something in looking at a system that we want to make sure is addressed and looked at. Thank you very much for your comments.
Our next question will come from Michael Connon. Please go ahead.
Yes, I am a disabled veteran. I'm paralyzed from the neck down. I've been on IHSS essentially since its inception. I've been paralyzed for 46 years. As you can hear from a number of the consumers that have spoken, there is a lot of concern about the idea of being institutionalized in our own homes. This is just another complication that is going to limit our ability to live our lives as we have been up to this point. I would like to encourage the state to consider vendorizing this new thing if they have to do it themselves rather than turn it out to somebody else who's going to be making a profit off of it. I would also like to say that I thank Debbie Thompson for her comments about being sensitive to trying to simplify, and I can only say simplify, simplify, simplify. If we can use the electronic timesheets and set them up together and make it one, I think that would go a long way in doing that. I would also like to say that my care is very complex, and I can't imagine having to, identify every task that we're doing. We have assessments that are done by the county that identify the tasks that are being done. If there's any way we can incorporate that to meet this new burden, I think that would be very good. Again, I would like to say anything that we can do to simplify this would be the best. And Joey Riley is also here and would like to speak.
Yes, thank you. I also would like to say, if you could simplify it, make it with EVV, with the electronic timesheets, have not one size fits all, but have those people who can't do electronic or phones or whatever, that they, have a different portion, so it's not just one size fits all. And if you could record these stakeholder calls, all of them, and put them on YouTube, that would help the community a lot. On, I think, page 9 of 21, it says, in the recipient's home, and that's where the services are to be provided. And that's one of the things that is kind of sticking, and also location of service. And I'm wondering, can the location of service be California? Can it be San Diego County? I'm not sure exactly how you have to pinpoint that down. But what I find on this from people is that the idea of the recipient being only in-home. IHSS services are only in-home services, and lots of social workers and eligibility workers tell providers and consumers that is it, that even if they provide protective supervision, it's only in the home that you actually get paid. If you leave outside the home, then you don't get paid for that, and that's what they say. They don't say, they don't talk about the laundromat services if you have to be there, or driving to alternative resources, or, they don't clarify about shopping. Shopping is the provider can go shopping out into the community, and they can or cannot take the the consumer, but it's not a necessary thing. So all of these little weird details really need to be written out and provided to those people that are impacted by it. Go ahead, Michael.
Yes, there was one other comment that I wanted to make about, first of all, that my understanding is that at this point it's very broad what the federal government is asking. And there was a comment from Sarah earlier, and she said, if you miss something daily, and I'm hoping that this doesn't necessarily have to be a daily thing that people are, having to report in.
Yes. In the start and end times of service, I get up in the middle of the night, usually, like 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning or whatever. My day is actually 24 hours. There is not a time where I'm not on call and I'm not doing, a certain type of service. If I'm sleeping, I might be, so I'm working more like 18 hours a day. I only get paid for 12. I get intermittent sleep. So this idea that there is this set amount of service that is in a start and end time is unnerving to me, because that seems like it's going to be very restrictive. with the fires that have been happening, the Wi-Fi has dead zones and people can't get through and that kind of thing. So to have it only for one thing, where they can't use a landline or they can't use a smartphone or can't use a electronic thing, I think the more broad, the more avenues, the more ways that we can make it least restrictive and is better. Also, I'd like to know how many contract mode providers are working in the IHSS program, and would they be under the exact same thing as the regular providers? What else? There's one more thing. If you could have a statement that says what is allowed. Are providers allowed to take consumers out on vacation and get paid full services? Do they have to ask permission from their social worker or their county to travel outside of the county or the state? These things are very confusing for people, and they don't know the answers. And so if you could write out a thing about all of these things, it would clarify it for everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for all those comments, and I think you're touching on the exact same things that we're looking at ourselves and wanting to get more information about, and ensure that we are aware of and are addressing when we're looking at how EVV would work within the state. And I can't tell you how much I agree with simplify, and leverage what we have as much as we can. And thank you very much for your comments.
And our next one will come from Elizabeth Zuby. Please go ahead.
Zuby. I'm an IHS provider in San Diego. My son receives protective supervision, and he's also a regional center client. I have some deep concerns about this. We live in a rural area on top of a mountain. We don't have GPS. Even the sheriff can't get us on GPS. There's no cell phone service. I have to drive off the mountain to get cell phone. The landline, because it's lifeline, only goes 20-mile radius. And if it snows or the acorn woodpeckers take out the phone line, I have no way to communicate daily. And if it's snowing, we're snowed in. With protective supervision, I'm on the job 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I, as Joey said, am up often at 2 in the morning. If my son's sick, I'm doing laundry at 2:30 in the morning, cleaning the bathroom, changing the bed. None of these are on the time for task guidelines because the social worker does not address unmet needs. When I have to take him to the emergency room or there's a 9-hour wait in the ER, if the service is supposed to be provided at the home, there's no way to document the 9-hour wait in the ER and the 5-hour travel time. You need a flexibility in defining personal care services. Does it have to be specific? Well, today we cleaned the shower because he had an accident. He threw up in the living room. We had to clean the floor at 10:42 to 3:14. The federal government does not have the Lanterman Act. In-home support is a program that evolved in California and it has gradually, to the best of my knowledge, drifted across the states. The federal legislation is designed for people who can't get out of their home. When you have a regional center client, you don't want to be homebound 24 hours a day. You'll drive them crazy. If I have to call in every time I do something or when I start and stop a task, I'll run out of here screaming. It's not contributing to the sanity of the thing. When you have an emergency situation that we have in Sonoma and Napa counties, where in all likelihood a number of the people in the shelters are in-home support or getting services, and those services are rendered in a homeless shelter, how are they supposed to deal with the situation? And we've been evacuated twice in other fires where I'm at other people's houses or at Qualcomm Stadium, or you have the federal regulations don't address these situations. You need more flexibility in defining if it's just list personal care service and not, well, I did laundry, I brushed his teeth, I fed him, I chopped his food up, I cooked, blah, blah, blah. And does it have to be done daily? Who's going to read all this stuff? Who's going to see if there's discrepancies? It begs the question of, is there actual fraud, or is this a way to put more people in nursing homes? I have a whole lot of other things. I think that the federal legislation does not comply either with Olmstead or the Lanterman Act. And at some point, it will become ripe for a lawsuit. And if someone needs a client, we'll stand up. And that's my comments for today.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Our next question will come from Marty Omoto.
Yes, Marty Omoto, California Disability Senior Community Action Network and the California Person-Centered Advocacy Partnership. First, I just want, which I'm sure is in everyone's thoughts right now, but just to say it out loud, about just a reminder, or just for everyone just to remember and continue prayers and thoughts for the people in Sonoma County and the other counties, Napa, who are still dealing with the wildfires and the impact of that, especially on people with disabilities and seniors and people with mental health needs. And also, to give our support and our thoughts and prayers to the first responders. That also include IHSS workers, regional centers, and also the providers out there who are, dealing with that tragedy, and it's still ongoing. So appreciate, first of all, the work of the departments who are engaged in that effort. Secondly, just want to thank all the departments for putting on this call and for the outreach. The other advocates have mentioned that this is you're starting early, reaching out, and definitely appreciate that. Third, I want to echo the comments and support the comments made by a lot of the advocates. Many of them are my friends: Nancy Chance, Tammy Orr, Joey Riley, Michael Condon, and others. I think it's a mixture of people who are expressing fears that this doesn't restrict or erode rights that people have in home care and living in their own homes. But I think there's also a willingness to reach out and work with the state, because we think that, the least of views you have expressed show that you understand the sensitivities of this issue. And I think that, what the underlying reason for many advocates who may feel worried about all of this is just the mixed messages that people get when, Congress is trying to cut Medicaid funding and they call it something else than what it is. And so we're hearing all these things, and I think what happens is, as advocates, families, and others have a hard time understanding who to trust. So again, appreciate what you're doing, because you're trying to thread through all of that and trying to come up with the best way to implement this, working with us. And I just want to urge the departments there to consider forming work groups that are transparent, posting this call, the recording of this call and other calls on YouTube, as Joy Riley suggested and some others suggested. And also underscoring or clarifying that however this is implemented will be done in compliance with the Home and Community-Based Services final rule that also requires person-centered planning in providing services, including home care. And then lastly, I have a question for the famous Jim Knight, if he's still there, and that is the Department of Developmental Services. Did I wake him? So I just wanted a clarification. You mentioned that in terms of the Department of Developmental Services, home care services that would be impacted by this, you mentioned supported living and in-home respite. I wasn't sure if you did not mean to mention personal assistance services, because some of that is provided in the home, and also that this would likely impact or could impact some of the services provided under self-determination, when that waiver is eventually submitted and approved. And again, thanks to all of you.
Of course, and thank you for your thoughts, Marty. And we're getting Jim a microphone right now. There we go.
Yeah, hi, this is Jim Knight. And so on the services that I mentioned, Marty, you're right, I did mention supported living and in-home respite as some, but not all the services that would be impacted, and certainly personal assistance would be another. And, as far as the impact on self-determination would be similar types of services that would be provided under that as well.
Hey, thank you very much.
Sure.
Thank you, and I think we'll open it up to the room in case there's someone else in the room that has any comments that we haven't gotten a chance to hear from.
Donna Steele, Resources for Independent Living. I have a question. Can you give me a startup ballpark cost / federal state reimbursement figure, if any, maybe from other states up to the January 2019 date? Millions, billions per capita? Got anything like that?
Not at this point.
Okay.
Because we haven't even gotten information from vendors that we're looking at what we would do. So this is very, very early for us in the process.
But are you thinking millions, billions?
I really have no idea.
Okay.
That's one of our questions. Anybody else in the room?
I'm a IHSS consumer, and my worker comes in very early in the morning so I can get up and get moving because I have a full schedule during the day. I have her prepare my meals, and then I warm them up, and then she comes in the evening and helps me get ready for bed. Like many have already said, it seems to be a privacy issue, and I understand they want to make sure that the services are being rendered, but how do you do that if you have to stop all the time and write everything down? We're already responsible for the timesheets, and I personally can't do electronic timesheets because I don't have a computer. I'm not computer literate enough to deal with that situation. If I'm responsible again for the reporting of the times and when she starts and stops, I think it's already covered in the timesheet, and I think the service might be redundant. It's also very difficult when you have a split shift like my worker has to bring all the little reporting things that, how specific do they want to be? It seems like, bowel and bladder care and other parts that are covered in our evaluations should be sufficient if we get them evaluated every year, and we have timesheets that we sign off on, both the worker and the client. I think we're already impacted enough that it would be more redundancy unless you can grab the information from each section that we already are responsible for.
Thank you.
Chris Jensen from TELUS again. I just keep thinking, would it be helpful? I know this meeting with all the constituents and stakeholders is the beginning of a thoughtful process. Obviously, there's a lot of concerns and input. Would it be helpful, just as a technology provider, to sort of give some historical context to the history of EVV and just shed some light on how the technology works in its current form, just to give people context?
I don't think so at this point.
Not for today?
Yeah. Today we're just trying to get comment from the stakeholders.
Understood.
Once we go through the RFI process itself and hear from all of the vendors, then we will have another stakeholder process where we talk through the types of things that you're talking about. Thank you for the offer. Okay, we can go back to the phones.
Our next question will come from Ben Pellegrino. Susan?
Susan Pellegrino. I apologize. I'm at the dentist right now, but this was an important call and I didn't want to miss it. I feel sometimes that the government, state, federal, whatever, are tripping over dollars in order to pick up nickels. I am a provider as well as an active advocate for IHSS, and I hear a lot of stories, and some of them are similar to mine, like Tammy's and Joey's, where we have a consumer that requires extensive amounts of care, and that care changes every single day. You go through your normal routines of dressing and grooming and feeding and bowel and bladder and all that kind of stuff, but other things always pop up somehow, some way. And I think they have to stop and start and report every task, or however this program is going to be set up, is not only going to interfere with the quality and the continuity of care that they're being given, but it's also extremely restrictive in the sense that if it's going to be focused on in-home, like Joey says, I work 12 hours a day that I'm not compensated for. In a 30-day month, that's 437 hours I'm not compensated for, but yet I'm responsible to take care of my terminal spouse. And I think that this is going a little above and beyond what is necessary, especially in view of the fact that we do have communication with our social workers. They're fully aware of the needs of our consumer because that's what our hours are based upon. And my husband is on both IHSS and IHO. How is that going to work out? I have another provider that comes in a few hours a day for IHO. Does that mean I have to make sure that she calls in and out? I just think that this has not been well thought through. I know people in Illinois that's been on this program are extremely disappointed with it and do not agree with it. And I think that if we're supposed to be giving care to our consumer and by letting them live in their own home and have a community-based environment in which that they can reside in, that this is taken away from it. My husband is almost a recluse. He's paranoid. He's got dementia at the age of 62, in addition to a whole host of other health issues. He's got 24 doctors, 15 of which that we see on a regular basis. And I think that anytime I can get him to go out with me, whether it be to run an errand or to attend a church service or whatever, I grab those opportunities. I shouldn't have to be restricted to keep all his care within the home, especially if I can get him out and about. And I think that their needs have to be taken into consideration. And if this EVV program is going to hinder that care that we're supposed to render by occupying our time in a very needless manner, then I think that has to also be considered and addressed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question will come from Karen Gregorius.
Hello. Yes, Karen Gregorius, the Arc of Amador and Calaveras. Thank you for the opportunity to provide input. A caller earlier briefly touched on the topic. I would just like to request that during the development of the policy and the selection of the reporting platform, that consideration be given to the unique challenges of rural consumers and providers, such as body GPS, cell service, and internet service, and other kind of unique accessibility issues that impact consumers and providers in the rural geographic area.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next question will come from Ms. Sharon Francis. Ms. Francis, are you on the line? Ms. Sharon Francis? Is open.
Okay, I'm talking. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, this is Sharon, and I'm from Channel Islands Social Services in Ventura County. I'm a member of the California Respite Association, the vendor representative to the Tri-Counties Regional Center Board, and the founder and CEO of our organization that provides respite care for 13 years. So some of the concerns that I have about the electronic visit verification are just that anytime there's been any changes in our state with respite care, it's stressed the families out, which is exactly what we're not trying to do with what we do. It's anything that's made it more complicated or been perceived by the families as more complicated has demonstrated a reduction in the usage of the service, and we don't want that to happen. From an employer perspective, I looked into implementing this a couple of years ago by having staff call in or go on the internet to log out started and that they ended. There are a couple of different systems that our members in the California Respite Association are using. Some of them use systems to help schedule and take care of the logging in and logging out of hours. And some of them are better than others. And I think Kevin Manos earlier was on the call, and he might be able to speak to that in the future, and other of our members. But one of the things that I found from seeking advice from a labor attorney, and I would strongly encourage you all to do that in this development, is from the employer side. If you're requiring staff to do that, then you're supposed to provide them a cell phone stipend or an internet stipend, or you're supposed to be providing them a cell phone or a tablet, and that's just cost prohibitive. We couldn't go down that road, not to mention the fact that the software fees that we were being quoted had per call-in fees and software fees, and it was going to cost $10,000 to $20,000 a year just for our organization, and we just couldn't do that. Not to mention the fact that the state is trying to minimize the administrative costs with all of our organizations, holding us accountable to percentages of admin versus direct care. So if we have to absorb some of the costs for this implementation, that needs to be addressed by funding, by DDS, and looked at in terms of the percentage of admin that we're going to be allowed to operate on. One question that I had, or maybe you don't have the answer now, but is that manual and retroactive entries, would those be allowed, or do they have to be that by the end of that day? Because, again, back to what's keeping it simple for our families and my staff, some of whom only work 8 hours a month to support one family. If they could do the manual or retro entries up to a couple of weeks after, or within the month, would that be allowed? And then the system needs to also allow mileage. Respite organizations, many pay commute mileage to and from the caregiver's home so that they can be paid to go out to further regions. I live in a very expansive county. The system also needs to possibly allow for travel time, overtime, paid sick leave, and also account for multiple ratios of care. We have many families who have two children with developmental disabilities that one of our providers cares for, and it's a different rate of pay that we have with the regional center for those ratios. So is that going to be accounted for? 15% of my caseload, my families and staff are Spanish speaking. So that's a must. It's got to be able to support them, but I am very concerned about their ability to welcome that kind of a change and just make what is such a personal service so much more impersonal. And then lastly, our current system that we've had in place for years has been paper-based, and even though it sounds old, it's what works. And we have the, families sign off every single day of care so that they're verifying that. And then we have to do all the data entry on our side for our billing, of course, and our payroll. But when the families receive, we send quarterly utilization letters to them to help prevent fraud and identify if we've made an error on our billing side. If they see that there's something off, they ask us to send them copies, which we do, of the timesheets. And then sometimes it's, oh, yeah, the dad signed off instead of the mom, and the mom's questioning or whatever. And so we found that system simple and accountable and, yet to be audited, which is another issue. But that's my concerns, and I'm wishing that respite agencies who only provide 8 to 30 hours a month per family could be exempted from that. But I know that's probably not the long-term solution. It's just I'm interested in the person who said, okay, if it's only a 1% penalty, can we just opt out? I wonder what the cost of that would be. Thank you.
Thank you for all of your comments, and you touched on numerous things that we have asked for information on within the RFI, including the ability to, if someone forgets to check in or check out, and how that happens, the travel, the sick time, language support. Many of those are in the request for information currently, because those are areas that we're very interested in as well and hearing about. So thank you very much for your comments.
Our next question will come from Jasmine Marino.
Hi there, good morning. I have a couple of questions, one of which I think was touched on earlier, and the second of which is more of a comment, but I want to make sure it's being looked at. The first question is in regards to the requirements for reporting. So in regards to task changes, are they going to be done during the provider's shift? Will the provider have to stop what they're doing in order to change a task? And if so, we need to look at the complications of that, because that's going to be very difficult and cumbersome for the providers. Or will they have the ability to do that after their shift is over to log the tasks that were completed with the consumers? That's my first question. Second question is in regards to providers with low literacy levels. Our providers, we're looking at about 75% struggle with low literacy levels. And when I say low literacy levels, I mean education of elementary school education. How do we plan on accommodating those providers?
Thank you very much.
And our next question will come from Chrissy Boucher.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey. I'm Christy, and I'm from Educate Advocate, and also the chair of the IHSS Advisory Committee for San Bernardino County. And I just have some suggestions. I was listening earlier to some comments about how this impacts our state law as far as the Landsman Act. I think a person named Tammy Orr spoke in detail about that, and I totally agree with her comments. But some solutions I was looking at were taking the existing electronic timesheet that has just rolled out. In fact, in my county, it just rolled out this last week on the 10th. And utilizing that, calculating, everybody could continue to calculate hours twice a month, at the times we already do. And then I was thinking about adding a section in there to put the times in and out, because currently we just have, the hours, the total hours, but to add in there with multiple lines that you could put in there for the times in and out. And then adding a section to check mark if the hours were just simply in the home or in the community. So that, I think that could, widen the issue there for people. And then a statement on the electronic form that just refers to, on the timesheet itself, the electronic timesheet refers to have people refer back to the individual's notice of action, which would outline, as far as the types of services that person is qualified for, or, approved for. And so going through the checklist, I think making those simple changes, and those could be made for the phone systems too, would comply with the federal requirement outlined in the 21st Century Cure Act that Obama signed into law, which, the type of service performed, keeping it general, just a general statement on there on the form itself, the individual receiving the service that's already in place on the electronic form, the date of service that's already in place, and then the location of service, like I said, keeping it very general of having a checkbox of home or community, the individual providing the service that's already in place, and the time and service where it begins and ends. That's why I was my comment or my suggestion was to add the section in there with multiple lines to put the times in and out, so that people could calculate that at the same rate that they're doing now, which is twice a month, not having to do this on a daily basis. And that would still comply with the federal law. So those are my suggestions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we're definitely looking at leveraging as much as we can what we have and seeing ways of not having to do duplication of things, and we appreciate your comments.
Our next question comes from Sumitra Joy.
Yes, hello, thank you. First of all, when you look at the legislation, from what I can tell, I'm not an attorney, it appears that the Social Security Act was amended, which gave us this EVV amending Section 12006. And from what I can read, it's not really saying it's mandated. It's basically saying it's an amendment that unless the state requires the implementation of EVV, then you will get a penalty. But it's not saying you have to do the EVV. It's saying unless the state does it, you will require a penalty. And from what I could see, the penalties are just 0.25% through 2024. And then it goes up to 0.5% at 2025. It doesn't get up to 1% until 2027. So I'm wondering, this seems like sort of like sanctuaries. The state actually, I think, should just somehow go up against this and say we're just going to not implement this. It's going to create too much of a burden. It's going to create a lot of costs, I think, that outweigh the benefits. I don't even actually see the benefits to it personally. So that's my biggest concern here, as well as I'm actually an employer in IHSS. I don't call myself a consumer because we had been employers for years before that. And I think that's been dumbed down and invalidated a lot of the disabled person's individual strengths and rights. And as a IHSS employer, I think that this is going to make it more difficult. I juggle sometimes 6 different providers. I'm homebound completely. I have a severe neurological and immune disease, and I also have crusted scabies. And at this point, I can't even get the state to pay for my medical disinfecting of my laundry, which has to be done, at least twice a week, if not more. And I've been given quotes from the state saying things like, unless you're in an institution, we won't pay for your laundry. We'll only pay for it if you're institutionalized. So my providers are out there at laundromats that I've had to work, I've had to work with personal laundromat services to actually implement a soaking of my laundry that has to be done for 10 hours in a laundromat overnight. This is just, this whole implementation of this EVV was started by a woman in Texas. I think it's a money-making thing for technology companies, and I don't see it as a benefit to any of the IHSS employers and providers. And I think you should take a look at the legislation and you should just fight it on the basis of just like the state is fighting and cities are fighting the implementation of cutting of funds for being sanctuary cities. And that's my comment.
Thank you very much for your comments. And just as a point of clarification, I think when you're looking at the penalty, there's two parts to the EVV. One is for the personal care services and one is for the home health agencies, and they have different timelines. The one for the personal care services, the penalty begins in 2019 and escalates to 1% in 2023, and then the home health actually requirement doesn't begin until 2023, and then it has the same escalating period over that 4-year period, which makes it look a little bit confusing of going from 19 to 27 with the penalty, but it has two separate pieces. I just wanted to make sure that people understood the difference between those two things, but thank you very much for your comments.
Our next question will come from Barbara Hanna.
Hi, thank you for having this opportunity for comments. I support the idea of a stakeholder group as well and the other issues that have been discussed regarding emergencies and when care is being provided in a shelter. I'd like to suggest that maybe an incentive is provided to the provider that's chosen to write this program, similar to perhaps what Caltrans does. Caltrans, when they're building roads, they incentivize the completion of their project on time, on budget with monetary payment. Equally, when the road is not built or there is problems with it, they incentivize by having a penalty. And this additional concept of incentivizing the award, I think, is important, particularly for ongoing support of this system. Our agency and other agencies this past year have had problems with an existing provider that was chosen by the state for Medi-Cal billing that did not take into consideration any live testing that included providers or other people. And this lack of their testing caused many of us that were running waiver programs to not be paid timely until the code was rewritten. And so I also strongly suggest that any testing of this system is done with real providers and client recipients before the whole thing goes live with the state, and that you include that in whatever the request for proposal is. I also support the concerns about rural areas, lack of coverage, labor laws that impact mileage time to be paid, and how does that mesh with IHSS and other waiver programs that say pay for time only in the home. And finally, again, person-centered care that Marty Amoto mentioned with the Olmstead Act and the Lanterman. If I didn't mention, I work with home and health care management. I also sit on the Olmstead Advisory Commission. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. I see that we're hitting about 10 to 12, and I want to have a little bit of time to kind of wrap up and give information about where to submit comments. So I just wanted to see if there's any final comments in the room, and then I'll ask on the phone.
Final comment. This is Anna Leach-Crawford. I live in Disability Rights, California. It seems to me a lot of the issues both on the consumer and provider side is around the type of service requirements. Do you all anticipate getting any further guidance from CMS as to the level of specificity that's going to be required? It just seems like when we're looking at even just RFI, for the vendors, or, are all these services for IHSS going to be low care services versus health services, or are we looking at actually having 15, 17, or the different tabs? Is that something you all have any sense of at this point?
I certainly think that it's an area that we've been thinking about and wanting to look at ways to make it as simple as possible. And We may be getting some additional direction from CMS, but I think even if we don't, we would want to evaluate, is there ways that we can look at type of service to perhaps have them in groups or things that are more simplified than the 25 individual services that we have right now, certainly in IHSS. So that's certainly something that we're considering as well, and it sounds like others are having a lot of thoughts about. So hopefully we can look at simplifying that as well.
The other thing is that there's two things. One is whether or not whatever this is going to be bilingual. They're going to have Spanish, Russian, Armenian, because both of these things that they do, like CalWIN, YDN, it's always in English. That's the providers should still right. So from the get-go, I think if they're going to build something, they have to make sure that it's bilingual. That the providers survive.
Absolutely. No,
yeah.
Totally agree, Kevin. And in the RFI, we've included those kinds of that it would need to be bilingual, accessible, accommodate blind and visually impaired, all of those types of accommodations.
Providers will be compensated for doing this paperwork. You know, like Medicare providers will complain that spend a lot of time, so is this compensable time?
I think that this should actually, our intent would be that it wouldn't be taking any more time than their normal process to complete their timesheet or electronic timesheet or paper timesheet.
Yeah, but you do that over here. You want them to do stuff every day, right?
Potentially. I mean, I think all of this is still, yes. Any final comments on the phone?
Yes, we have one from Alex Munford.
Yes, hi. Am I on the line?
Yes, you are.
Hey, so I have two questions. So the first question is, what does the current IHSS EVV rollout have to do with the California Master EVV system the state is planning for the Cures Act compliance? And then my second question is, how do we get the RFI document online?
Okay, so the first question, I think you're talking about what does it have to do with our current electronic timesheet rollout? Is that correct?
Yes, that is.
Okay, so we are currently rolling out as an option for our IHSS providers and recipients the electronic timesheet, and that's optional. It's not required. And as far as how it relates to EVV, it's certainly something that we're exploring how we could leverage that to meet the EVV requirement, which would then be EVV as a mandate versus the option for electronic timesheets. How that will all integrate, we don't yet know yet. That's part of what we're exploring and asking for information about. In relationship to your second question, the RFI came out with the invite, but we will also make it available.
It is online.
It's online.
It is available on the CDSS website on the IHSS section.
And I'm going to let Kim and Carol kind of wrap up the call now with how to submit additional comments and get other information.
Okay, thank you. We had sent out to most everyone on the call, in the actual invite, was a copy of the RFI along with the agenda for the meeting and the CMS PowerPoint. We are asking people to make comments on the RFI as we discussed throughout the meeting today. Comments are due by the close of business a week from today, which is October 19th, and should be sent to Carol Schwartzlander. And Carol, if you want to probably spell your name.
I will. So my email address, and I'll say this slowly, is Carol Schwartzlander, Karol Schwartzlander, SWARTZLANDER @dss.ca.gov.
You're going to have to say that again.
I know.
Yeah. And slower.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
A little slower. Okay. Carol, KAROL
Hang on. Let him get Carol.
Schwartzlander, SWARTZLANDER @dss.ca.gov.
Her email address is also on the CDSS website, along with copies of the RFI. I can get you. Do you have the page on there? So I was going to read off the. We're going to read you off the URL for that in just a second.
Is there any flexibility on that deadline? So I don't want to speak for anybody else back here, but when you said the date that they were due, I kind of heard a little struggling, including my own.
Well, we sent it out a week ago, and the idea was to give people 2 weeks to respond.
If there's a big issue, let us know. If people are working on comment and you can't get it to us, let us know, and we'll work with you.
Some of our large groups don't very large, reach out to a very large population.
Okay.
So I would appreciate that.
Okay. And let us know when you can get it to us by then. That would be great, and we'll work with you.
Sorry, we're trying to find where we put it on the CDSS website. We just put it up there a couple days ago. For those of you on Marty Emoto's email list, he also included the links in his email.
And we can certainly send her email address and the URL out to the same group that this invite went to as well. And while they're looking for that, I can also just kind of reiterate our next steps. We'll be gathering the comments for the RFI, hopefully in the next couple weeks here, and then using those to finalize our RFI document that will be then released. We will get information back in response to that, and then we plan to do a second stakeholder work group to talk about what we heard back on that request for information, and have discussions with you all about what we got back and what will be moving forward then at that point with.
I found it. Find it. Do you have a general sense of timing for this step?
So the RFI, we're hoping to get out sometime close to the end of the month.
Okay.
And then they have 30 days.
Yeah, when they give the vendors 4 weeks to respond. So we get back the responses towards the end of November. That's what we're trying to do, but if that...
And it'll take a while, obviously, to look at those and kind of integrate what we've got. I would imagine there would be another stakeholder group probably at the beginning of the year. Since we'll be in the holidays at that point.
Is there a date certain for the federal guidance? Do we know when?
They did not give us a particular date. The best we've heard is the beginning of the year, hopefully January.
Okay, we have that web address now for, and this has a copy of the RFI on it, along with Carol's email address and all of the other contact information we need. That is www.cdss.ca.gov/info-resources/IHSS. And I'll repeat that one more time. It's the CDSS website, so www.cdss.ca.gov/info-resources/IHSS.
And again, we'll send all that information out to the invite for this group as well. Thank you all very much for your participation, your comments, and your feedback. It's very valuable to us going through this process.
And that does conclude your call for today. Thank you for using AT&T Executive Teleconferencing. You may now disconnect.